The Virgin Mary's voice cut through the gunfire, demanding immediate action against the unseen enemy ambush that was about to claim Specialist Michael Vance's life. 22 and weary, Michael felt the crippling fatigue of combat as he moved down the dusty, exposed alley. He was scanning the rooftops, unaware that a high-velocity round was already in flight, aimed directly at his head. Subscribe for more stories of faith, and tell us in the comments, have you ever heard a warning voice? Michael Vance hadn't felt the comforting peace of Sunday morning Mass in nearly 18 months. The sun beating down on him now was not the gentle warmth of an Ohio summer. It was a brutal, oppressive furnace that baked the dust into his uniform and the doubt into his soul. This third deployment had been different. The constant low-grade fear, the impossible decisions, and the sight of senseless loss had chipped away at the foundation of his faith, leaving him running on fumes. He remembered the specific moment he felt the faith disconnect most acutely. It had been during the last patrol, 2 days prior, when his team leader took shrapnel. Michael had dropped to his knees, not to pray, but to apply the tourniquet, realizing that his hands moved purely by training, not by divine guidance. That night, lying awake on his cot, the noise of the bass a dull throb in his ears, he had tried to reach for the familiar comfort of the rosary beads his grandmother had tucked into his pack. He held them, cool plastic against his sweaty palm, but the words felt hollow. Hail Mary, full of grace. Grace felt like a concept invented on another planet. Here, there was only grit, exhaustion, and the bitter taste of fear. He felt guilty about the spiritual silence. He knew his parents and his parish back home were praying for him, lighting candles before the statue of the Blessed Mother. He had been raised to believe in the armor of God, but lately the only armor he trusted was the Kevlar strap to his chest. As they started the movement into the alleyway, the heat intensified, trapping the thick air. Michael's shoulders ached under the weight of his gear, and his vision swam slightly from dehydration. He fought the urge to close his eyes for just a second. He was the backstop, the last man. He couldn't afford to falter. A wave of intense, lonely despair washed over him. He wasn't just tired of the war. He was tired of trying to believe that goodness and protection existed in this environment. He didn't ask for a miracle. He didn't even ask for survival. In that moment of profound vulnerability, Specialist Vance just wanted the exhaustion to end. He felt utterly, completely forsaken. A tired, cold soul moving toward an unknown endpoint, believing solely in his own diminishing strength. It was precisely in that vacuum of hope and surrender that the impossible, rose-scented voice would soon break through. The drone of the generators, the distant chatter of the street vendors, and the heavy breathing inside his oxygen-starved lungs, all of it vanished, sucked out of existence as if a plug had been pulled from the universe. Michael's ears popped, but the vacuum wasn't painful. It was absolute, a profound, immediate silence that settled over him like a velvet cloak. He didn't stop walking, but every cell in his body recognized the anomaly. He was locked in a bubble of impossible quiet, separated from the war by an invisible shield. Then the air shifted. It was a subtle transformation, not of temperature, but of essence. The metallic tang of sweat and cordite was suddenly overlaid by an aroma so pure, so out of place, that it felt like a physical shock. The deep, sweet fragrance of blooming garden roses, a scent he hadn't experienced since his childhood visits to the Marian shrine behind his church. The warmth followed the scent, radiating outward from his heart, a gentle heat that banished the cold dread that had been his constant companion. It was not the oppressive heat of the sun, but an internalized spiritual warmth, the kind of comfort that felt like a mother's touch on a fevered brow. Finally, the voice. It did not boom or echo, it simply was, existing in the empty space behind his eyes, resonating deep within his consciousness. It was the unmistakable voice of the Virgin Mary, the one he had heard in countless prayers, now speaking to him directly, personally, and urgently. It was a voice imbued with the deep sorrow of a mother
who knows pain, yet utterly saturated with grace. "Michael," she whispered, and hearing his name spoken in that tone, by that source, was more jarring than any explosion. "My son, duck now, you must duck now. For the love of my son, do not hesitate." The command was absolute, bypassing all logic, all military training, and all fear. It was a perfect instruction wrapped in perfect love. Michael didn't look up, didn't question the impossible roses, and didn't stop to analyze the spiritual significance of the Divine Mother speaking to him in the middle of an alleyway ambush. He simply obeyed. In a desperate, primal move that defied the weight of his gear and the exhaustion of his body, he dropped his rifle and threw himself sideways, collapsing into the filth and shadow of the alley wall. The movement was instant, a reflex born not of training but of spiritual submission. The very instant his helmet cleared the trajectory, the sound of the sniper round tore the manufactured silence apart. Crack! It was the loudest sound he had ever heard, a sound that screamed of lethal intent, and it came from a distance too far for his team to have spotted the threat. The bullet struck the brick wall exactly where his head had been a fraction of a second prior, sending a blinding spray of pulverized mortar and brick dust raining down on him. The immediate danger had been identified and neutralized, not by counterfire, but by divine geometry. Michael lay there, his face pressed into the dirt, feeling the hot rush of the ambush erupting around him, but knowing, with a certainty that settled his soul, that he was already saved. The alley exploded into chaos. The sniper shot, which had missed Michael by a centimeter, was the signal for a heavy, coordinated attack. The rhythmic pop, pop, pop of automatic weapon fire immediately saturated the air, ricocheting off the narrow walls. Michael, still stunned and lying flat, heard his sergeant, Sergeant Miller, roar into the radio. "Contact! Contact left! They knew we were here!" Adrenaline, cold and sharp, finally flooded Michael's system, overriding the spiritual shock. He scrambled to retrieve his rifle, the butt of the weapon slippery with sweat and dirt. He helped lay down suppressive fire as the squad fought to break contact and find cover. The fight was sharp, brutal, and over quickly, as the ambushers realized they had lost the element of surprise and melted back into the shadows of the city. Once the immediate threat was suppressed, and the squad had established a defensive perimeter, Sergeant Miller, a man whose face was usually carved from granite, rushed toward Michael. His eyes were wide, a look of pure, unadulterated shock etched on his features. "Vance! Vance, are you hit?" Miller grabbed Michael by the shoulder, pulling him up. "What in God's name was that maneuver? You just dropped out of the formation like you saw a ghost. If you hadn't dropped right then, you'd be gone, son." Michael, still breathing hard, shook his head. "I'm okay, Sergeant. I just felt. I don't know." He couldn't say, "I heard the Virgin Mary tell me to duck." Miller didn't wait for an answer. He dragged Michael 2 steps back and pointed to the wall where Michael had been walking. The bullet hole was stark and undeniable. It was a precise, clean strike mark, perfectly centered, located exactly at the height of a standing man's head. The bullet had penetrated the thick brick, leaving a crater the size of a fist. The round was not a stray. It was zeroed. It was a kill shot. The sight of the hole, the physical proof of the lethal intent, made Michael's knees tremble violently. He reached out, touching the rough, pulverized brick dust surrounding the point of impact. Had he maintained his stride, had he hesitated for even a quarter of a second, the bullet would have gone straight through his skull. The medic, Specialist Chen, arrived, checking Michael's vitals and giving him water. "Miller's right, Vance. That was incredible luck. Or instinct. That sniper had a perfect line on you." Michael looked at the hole, then back at his hands, still smudged with the alley's filth. Luck? Instinct? He looked up at the relentless blue sky, searching for the source of the voice, the source of the roses. He had been so tired, so ready to surrender his faith, and yet, in his lowest moment, the Queen of Heaven had personally intervened. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, wiping
Gone away the exhaustion and the doubt. This wasn't a near miss. This was a delivered promise. He had been utterly exposed, moving blindly toward a hidden death, and a divine mother had reached across the divide of heaven and earth to whisper a life-saving warning into the ear of her doubting child. The rosary beads in his pocket suddenly felt heavy, not hollow, but charged with absolute, undeniable truth. Specialist Vance was not alone. He was protected. Michael sank back against the cold, rough wall, the residual shock making his limbs heavy, but the exhaustion he had felt moments ago was completely gone, replaced by a searing, spiritual clarity. He looked at the bullet hole again, not with fear, but with awe. It wasn't the sniper who had been precise, it was the timing of the warning. The Virgin Mary hadn't just told him to duck, she had timed the instruction with the exact moment the round was irreversible, ensuring his survival by the narrowest, most miraculous margin. He reached into his chest pocket and pulled out the small, worn rosary, the beads his grandmother had insisted he carry. Moments ago they had felt like a meaningless superstition, a relic of a lost peace. Now they felt like a lifeline, a physical anchor to the divine intervention that had just occurred. He ran his thumb over the crucifix, remembering the scent of roses, a scent that carried the weight of eternity and the comfort of the highest love. It wasn't luck, it was grace. Michael understood now why the intervention had been so direct, so personal, and so undeniable. He hadn't just been saved from a bullet, he had been saved from spiritual despair. He had been ready to surrender his belief that God cared, that the saints listened, that prayer held power in a world defined by cruelty. The ambush was not just a physical threat, it was the culmination of his doubt. And just as the darkness was closing in, the light broke through, carried by the voice of the mother who would never abandon her child. He closed his eyes, ignoring the anxious chatter of his squad securing the area. In the silence of his heart, he offered the deepest, most reverent prayer of gratitude he had ever known. It was not a formal recitation, but a broken, tear-filled acknowledgement of the impossible truth. He was not forsaken. The armor of God was real, fashioned not of steel or Kevlar, but of perfect, attentive love. He had doubted the existence of the divine in the face of human evil, and the divine had answered the doubt by manifesting salvation in the very moment of his greatest peril. Michael straightened up, his fatigue replaced by an inner strength that felt utterly foreign and yet completely necessary. He still had a patrol to finish, a war to fight, and dangers ahead. But the fear was different now. The cold logic of survival was tempered by the warmth of certainty. He was a soldier, yes, but he was also a son, watched over by a heavenly mother whose gentle command had proven more powerful than any weapon forged by man. He knew with absolute certainty that no matter how desolate the path became, no matter how loud the gunfire, he would never, ever walk alone again. His faith was not just restored, it was forged in the fire of a miracle. Hours later, under the cover of a merciful moonless night, the patrol finally returned to the relative safety of the forward operating base. The silence inside Michael's barracks was heavy, the air thick with the smell of sweat and cleaning solvent. He sat on the edge of his cot, the day's events replaying not as a battle sequence, but as a spiritual awakening. He pulled the rosary out again,
holding it up near the small, weak light bulb hanging overhead. The plastic beads caught the light, and Michael noticed something he hadn't seen before. A tiny, faint, almost imperceptible smudge of red dust clinging to the crucifix. Dust that could only have come from the brick wall where the sniper round had struck. It was a minuscule, physical reminder of the perfect protection he had received. Michael didn't need to speak to anyone about the roses or the voice. Sergeant Miller had already written up the report, labeling Michael's action as an extraordinary, instantaneous reaction to developing threat. A description that satisfied the needs of the military records, but utterly failed to capture the truth. The truth was between Michael and his protector. He lay back on his cot, the uncomfortable mattress feeling strangely soft.
He distanced sounds of the bass, failing to disturb the profound peace that had settled over him. He thought of his parents praying the rosary back home, their faith a strong, invisible current that had clearly reached him across continents and conflict. He realized that the Virgin Mary's intervention wasn't just a rescue, it was a profound affirmation of the interconnectedness of the faithful, a demonstration that when the world feels most broken, the communion of saints is strongest. He closed his eyes, and instead of the usual anxious exhaustion, he felt the spiritual warmth return, soft and pervasive. The doubt was gone, incinerated by the single, impossible moment in the alley. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he had been seen, loved, and guarded by the purest love in existence. The Mother of God had called his name, confirming that no matter how desolate the battlefield, no Christian soldier ever fights truly alone. His life was not his own. It was a gift preserved by grace, a testament to the fact that Jesus and his mother are always watching, always listening, and always ready to intercede for those who are lost and weary. If this story touched your heart and strengthened your faith, please like and subscribe to Whispers of the Divine for more stories of miraculous intervention. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that they are seen, loved, and protected today.